Inside the turning point no one took seriously. It started with a detail so small it barely earned a footnote, a minor anomaly in the data, a comment buried in user feedback, the kind of signal companies notice and then immediately ignore. But this one refused to disappear. At the time, everything looked fine. Growth charts moved upward. Engagement held steady. Leadership meetings followed familiar rhythms. On the surface, there was no reason to question the trajectory. Yet beneath that stability, a quiet inconsistency kept resurfacing, subtle, persistent, and inconvenient. To understand why this turning point mattered, we have to rewind to the moment it first appeared. A single team flagged an odd behavior pattern among a narrow group of users. They weren't leaving, they weren't complaining, but they were interacting differently, slower in some areas, faster in others, using the product in ways no one had planned for. Most organizations would have dismissed it as noise. After all, edge cases are expensive to chase, and success trains companies to focus on the majority, not the margins. The anomaly didn't threaten revenue. It didn't trigger alarms. It didn't justify a pivot. So it was documented, archived, and forgotten. But the pattern didn't fade. Weeks later, the same behavior appeared again, in a different region, among a different type of user. Still small, still easy to ignore, still inconvenient. Yet now it was repeating, and repetition transformed coincidence into signal. Inside a quiet review meeting, someone finally asked the wrong question. What if this is an exception? The room paused, because if it wasn't, then everything they believed about how customers use the product was incomplete, and the systems optimized for yesterday's behavior might already be misaligned with tomorrow's expectations. This is where the reveal begins, not with a crisis, not with a collapse, but with the uncomfortable realization that the future rarely announces itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper, and the companies that survive are the ones willing to listen before everyone else does. Once the question was asked, the signal became impossible to unsee. The team returned to the data with fresh eyes, tracing the anomaly across timelines, regions, and user segments. What they found was unsettling. The behavior wasn't random. It followed a pattern, one that grew stronger the longer they looked. The reveal deepened. These users weren't struggling with the product. They were outgrowing it. They moved faster than the workflows anticipated. They skipped steps the system insisted were necessary. They stitched features together in ways designers had never imagined. The product still worked, but it was quietly resisting the way these users wanted to think. At first, the insight felt abstract, interesting but not urgent. The users affected were still a minority. Revenue remained stable. Leadership questioned whether the signal justified attention when so many larger initiatives competed for resources. The temptation to deprioritize it was strong, but the pattern kept spreading. Each month, the same behavior appeared in new cohorts. The anomaly widened from an edge case into a trend. Support tickets hinted at the same friction, phrased differently but rooted in the same constraint. Power users adapted. New users hesitated. And slowly, the product's most engaged audience began behaving like it was negotiating with the system instead of flowing through it. That's when tension surfaced. Teams debated interpretation. Some argued the users were simply advanced and would adapt. Others warned that advanced users often become the standard faster than companies expect. Designers feared touching core flows that had been refined for years. Engineers cautioned that the system wasn't built for this level of flexibility. Product leaders hesitated, knowing any response would ripple across the entire platform. The conflict wasn't loud, it was procedural. Meetings extended, decisions stalled. The signal sat in the middle of every conversation without ever being named as a priority. Then came the moment that shifted the tone. A small experiment, launched quietly to test a hypothesis, produced a surprising result. When a single constraint was removed, the anomalous users moved effortlessly. Engagement jumped, completion rates improved, and behavior that once looked chaotic suddenly made sense. The anomaly wasn't a problem. It was a preview, a glimpse of how users would expect the product to behave once the market caught up with them. And that realization reframed everything, because now the team understood that ignoring the signal wouldn't preserve stability. It would delay inevitability. The turning point no one took seriously was no longer theoretical. It was actionable. And the next question was far more dangerous than the first. If this behavior was the future, were they willing to rebuild for it before everyone else demanded they do? The question fractured the room. Rebuilding for behavior that hadn't fully arrived felt reckless. The product worked. The business was healthy. The anomaly still represented a fraction of users. Acting now meant disrupting systems that had been optimized through years of iteration. Waiting felt safer, rational, defensible. But safety was exactly the problem. The conflict surfaced slowly. Then all at once, designers worried that loosening constraints would confuse the majority. Engineers warned that flexibility would strain architecture never meant to support it. Leadership feared opening a door they couldn't close. Every concern was valid, and together, they formed a powerful argument for doing nothing. Yet the data refused to cooperate. As the months passed, the anomalous behavior accelerated. What once appeared only among power users began showing up in newer accounts. Onboarding times lengthened. Drop-offs increased at the same friction points again and again. The system wasn't broken, but it was becoming increasingly misaligned with how people wanted to think and work. The emotional peak arrived when a larger experiment was finally approved. The team removed a second core constraint, one considered untouchable. The test ran quietly, limited to a control group, but the results were immediate and undeniable. Users completed tasks faster. They explored more deeply. They created workflows that unlocked value no roadmap had predicted. The product felt alive in a way it never had before. And just as important, the system began to strain. Logs revealed new bottlenecks. Data pipelines lagged. Performance dipped in unpredictable places. The experiment confirmed the future and exposed a dangerous truth at the same time. The platform could support this behavior philosophically, but not structurally. The turning point had arrived. Either they stopped the experiments, preserved the old model, and accepted gradual relevance, or they committed fully, not to a feature change, but to a foundational rebuild that would let the product evolve alongside its users. There was no third option. The conflict was no longer about interpretation. It was about courage, about whether the company would lead the shift it had detected, or wait until competitors forced it upon them. Silence filled the room as the decision crystallized, because once they crossed this line, there would be no easy way back. They crossed the line, not with certainty, but with conviction built from evidence too consistent to ignore. The experiments had revealed something rare, a future that was already forming inside their product, asking to be supported instead of suppressed. Preserving the old model would protect today. Rebuilding would prepare them for tomorrow. The rebuild began at the foundation. Engineers untangled rigid workflows that assumed users would move step by step. Designers reimagined flows as flexible paths instead of fixed funnels. Data systems were rewritten to respond dynamically rather than in force sequence. It wasn't an upgrade. It was a philosophical shift from controlling behavior to enabling it. Progress was uneven. Some changes unlocked instant gains. Others triggered failures that forced painful rollbacks. Teams learned which constraints mattered and which ones only existed out of habit. The product became messier before it became stronger. But gradually, something extraordinary happened. The system stopped resisting its users. Power users flourished. New users adapted faster. Features once ignored became central. The product felt less like a machine enforcing rules and more like a framework people could shape to their own thinking. Growth returned, not in spikes, but in sustained momentum driven by genuine alignment. This was the climax. The turning point no one took seriously became the decision that separated them from competitors still optimizing for yesterday's behavior. While others chased metrics, this company rebuilt meaning. And when the market finally shifted, when flexibility became expectation, they were already there. In the resolution, the lesson was unmistakable. The future rarely announces itself at scale. It appears first in the margins, in anomalies that don't fit existing models. Companies don't miss the future because they lack data. They miss it because they wait for permission to act on what the data already shows. The turning point was never dramatic. It was quiet, easily ignored, almost invisible, until it wasn't. Subscribe to join the journey. In